They had goals. They had conviction. They had a sense of identity that felt grounded. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And then something small showed up. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make anyone stop and say, "This is serious." Just something subtle, a compromise, a thought they entertained longer than they should have, a habit they picked up, telling themselves it was temporary, a reaction they justified because of what they had been through. At first, it bothered them. There was tension, a quiet sense that something wasn't right. Moments where they paused and thought, "I shouldn't ignore this." But they didn't deal with it right away. They told themselves they would come back to it. They told themselves they just needed time. They told themselves it wasn't a big deal. And life kept moving. Work, responsibilities, conversations, routines, everything continued. Days passed, then weeks, and that small thing stayed. It didn't fix itself. It didn't disappear. It just remained quietly. And over time, something began to shift. They started thinking about it differently. What once felt uncomfortable started to feel manageable. What once felt wrong started to feel understandable. They found reasons for it, explanations that made it easier to accept. It's not that bad. Everyone has something. I'm still doing okay. And on the outside, they were. Nothing collapsed. Life didn't fall apart overnight. They were still showing up, still functioning, still moving forward. But underneath that, something deeper was changing. Their clarity started to fade. Not all at once, but slowly. Decisions that used to feel simple became harder. Convictions that used to feel strong became quieter. That inner sense of direction started to feel distant. And at first, they didn't connect the two. They thought it was stress. They thought it was just a phase. They thought maybe they were overthinking things. But the truth was, that small thing wasn't small anymore. It had started shaping how they saw themselves. Quietly, subtly. It changed the way they spoke to themselves. It affected their confidence. It lowered what they expected from their own life. And when identity shifts, even a little, everything else begins to move with it. They started making decisions differently, not from clarity, but from compromise. Not from conviction, but from comfort. Not from purpose, but from what felt easier in the moment. And over time, their life reflected those shifts. Opportunities passed by, not because they weren't there, but because they didn't feel ready. Relationships felt strained, not because they didn't care, but because something inside them wasn't aligned. Their sense of purpose didn't disappear, but it became harder to recognize, harder to trust, harder to follow. And the most dangerous part, none of it felt sudden. There was no moment where everything broke, no clear turning point, no dramatic collapse, just a slow, steady drift. And one day, they found themselves in a place they never expected. Not completely lost, but not fully aligned either. Not completely disconnected, but not deeply connected either. Somewhere in between, living, but not fully alive. Moving, but without clarity. Functioning, but not fulfilled. And when they finally looked back, they saw it clearly. They didn't fall overnight. They adapted little by little. They adjusted to something that was never meant to stay. And without realizing it, they allowed it to shape them, piece by piece, decision by decision, until it quietly influenced the direction of their life. And the hardest part wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. It was realizing that what seemed small in the beginning had never been small at all. And what they had learned to live with had been shaping everything all along, even their purpose. Let's slow this down for a moment, not to make it complicated, but to finally make it clear. Because what you've been feeling, what that story just described, it isn't random. It's not something that just happened to you without a reason. There's a pattern to it. There's a process behind it. And once you begin to see that process, once you recognize how it actually works, it changes the way you understand everything. It usually begins in a very simple place. What you tolerate eventually becomes what you accept. And what you accept eventually starts to feel normal. At the beginning, tolerance feels temporary. You tell yourself, this is just for now. You say, I'll deal with it later. You convince yourself, this isn't who I am. It's just something I'm going through. But the mind doesn't hold on to temporary the way you think it does. The mind learns through repetition. And what you experience over and over again starts to feel familiar. And what feels familiar starts to feel safe, even when it isn't. Even when something deep inside you knows it's not right. Even when it's quietly working against you. Familiarity has a way of lowering your guard. It softens your resistance. That inner voice that used to speak up becomes quieter. That discomfort you used to feel becomes easier to ignore. Something that once stood out clearly begins to blend into the background of your life. And before you even realize it, you're no longer just tolerating it, you're living with it. And once you start living with something, you stop questioning it. And that's where the next shift happens. What you've normalized begins to shape how you see yourself. Not in big, obvious ways, but in quiet, repeated thoughts. Small statements you say without thinking. This is just who I am. I've always struggled with this. This is just part of my personality. And those statements don't feel harmful. They feel honest. They feel grounded. But what they're actually doing is changing your identity. They take something that entered your life, something that was never meant to define you, and slowly turn it into something you believe is part of you. And once something feels like part of your identity, you stop resisting it, because resisting it starts to feel like resisting yourself. And that's where the real shift happens. It's not that the issue became stronger, it's that your resistance became weaker. Because now, it's not something you deal with, it's something you believe you are. And from that place, everything else begins to change. Because every decision you make flows from who you believe you are, not who you hope to become, not who you once were, but who you've accepted yourself to be. So if something has quietly reshaped your identity, it will just as quietly reshape your direction. The opportunities you say yes to or walk away from, the risks you avoid, the standards you settle for, the boundaries you allow others to cross, the way you handle pressure, the way you respond when things don't go your way, the way you picture your future, all of it flows from identity. And that's how purpose is affected. Not because it disappears, but because it gets redirected quietly, steadily, day by day. Because every small decision, every moment of choosing comfort over honesty, every time you ignore that inner nudge, it reinforces the direction you're already moving in. And over time, that direction becomes your life. And then one day you pause, and something feels off. Things feel unclear, misaligned, and you wonder why. But the answer isn't hidden somewhere outside of you. It's not about missing opportunities. It's not about bad timing. It's about what has been quietly shaping you all along, what you allowed, what you accepted, what you stopped questioning. And this is the moment where it becomes real. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand it, you can't pretend you don't know. You can't keep saying, I don't understand why, because now you do. And that awareness, it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels like everything you've been standing on is being questioned. But that doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is being revealed. And what's being revealed is not meant to break you. It's meant to show you what needs to change. Because awareness is not the end of the process. It's the beginning. This is where things begin to shift. Not automatically, not without effort, but with a choice. Because once you become aware, you can't stay where you are without deciding to stay there. You can push it away again like you've done before, or you can sit with it just a little longer this time. And sitting with it, that's the hard part, because it means you stop running. You stop distracting yourself. You stop explaining it away. You stop softening it. You let yourself see it clearly. And that doesn't feel comfortable. But it doesn't feel uncomfortable because you're failing. It feels uncomfortable because you're being honest. And honesty, especially after a long time of avoiding it, feels unfamiliar. But here's what you need to understand. That discomfort you feel right now, that tension, that inner pull, that's not rejection, that's conviction. And those two things are not the same. Rejection tells you that you don't belong. Conviction reminds you that you were never meant to stay where you are. Rejection creates distance. Conviction brings awareness. Rejection shuts you down. Conviction wakes you up. And the problem is, many people confuse the two. So instead of leaning into conviction, they run from it, they avoid it, they distract themselves from it, because they think it means something is wrong with them. But what if it actually means something is still right? What if the fact that you still feel this means something inside you is still alive? There's something in your life, something you didn't choose, but somehow, over time, you learn to live with it. You didn't wake up one morning and decide, this is who I want to be. That's not how it happened. It almost never happens that way. It began quietly, so quietly you barely noticed it at first. It showed up as a small discomfort, a feeling you couldn't quite explain, something that made you pause for a moment and think, that's not right. Maybe it was a habit. Maybe it was a thought you entertained a little too long. Maybe it was a reaction you justified because of what you had been through. At the beginning, it bothered you. It tugged at you. There was something inside that resisted it, even if you couldn't fully put it into words. But life didn't stop. Days kept moving. Responsibilities kept calling. Conversations kept happening. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you adjusted. You told yourself it wasn't that serious. You told yourself everyone has something. You told yourself, I'll deal with it later. And later, quietly became never. You started building around it. You found ways to function with it. You learned how to carry it without thinking too much about it. You learned how to smile, even with it still there. You learned how to pray, but avoid mentioning it. And little by little, what once felt wrong began to feel normal. So normal that you stopped questioning it. So normal that if someone pointed it out, you might feel the need to defend it. So normal that it blended into your routines, your thoughts, your identity. But here's the truth that's harder to face. God never adjusted to it. Not for a moment. Not when it first appeared. Not when you began to justify it. Not even now. You may have learned to live with it, but God never did. And what if the very thing you've gotten used to is the very thing standing in the way of your purpose? What if the thing you've been managing is quietly redirecting your life? What if the thing you stopped fighting is the reason something feels off, even when everything looks fine on the outside? Because purpose doesn't always disappear in one big moment. Sometimes it fades slowly, buried under layers of what you've learned to accept. And the hardest part? You don't even notice it anymore. You don't question it. You've made peace with something that was never meant to stay. But deep down, if you slow down long enough, there's still something there. A quiet nudge, a gentle discomfort, a voice that doesn't shout, but doesn't go away either. Something inside you still whispers, this isn't right. You've just gotten very good at not listening. You don't have to look far to recognize this. It shows up in everyday life in ways that don't look dramatic at all. It looks like waking up in the morning, not in crisis, but with a quiet heaviness sitting on your chest. Nothing is obviously wrong. Your life is moving. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You go to work. You talk to people. You handle responsibilities. From the outside, everything seems fine. But underneath it all, something feels off. And instead of stopping to ask why, you keep going. You tell yourself you're just tired. You tell yourself it's stress. You tell yourself it's normal. It looks like sitting in a place of worship, hearing words about faith, about healing, about purpose. And part of you knows those words are true, but they feel distant, like they belong to someone else's life, not yours. Not because they aren't real, but because something inside you has created distance, and you can't even remember when that distance began. It looks like laughing in conversations, saying the right things, nodding at the right moments, but inside there's a gap, a quiet space between who people see and who you know you are when you're alone. And you've learned how to manage that gap. You've learned how to carry things privately, quiet compromises, things you once said you would never allow, thoughts you justified, habits you excused, reactions you explained away. And every time it came up, you said, I'll deal with it later. But later kept moving. A few days became a few weeks, weeks became months, and now it feels like part of your life. But here's the truth you don't say out loud. You're not completely unaware. You feel it sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, when the distractions are gone, when there's nothing left to cover it up. There are moments when you feel it clearly, moments when you realize something isn't aligned. But instead of sitting there, instead of facing it, you move. You reach for your phone, you turn on the TV, you fill the silence, because silence makes it louder. And if it gets louder, you might have to deal with it. And dealing with it means change, and change feels uncomfortable. So instead, you adjust again. You push it down just a little deeper. You learn to live around it just a little better. Until one day, it doesn't feel separate anymore. It feels like you. But here's what's hard to accept. Just because something feels normal doesn't mean it belongs. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's right. Just because you've carried it for a long time doesn't mean you were meant to carry it forever. And somewhere deep inside, you already know that. That quiet discomfort, that subtle tension, that feeling you keep trying to explain away. It's not random. It's not meaningless. It's a signal, a sign that something in your life has been accepted but never truly healed. And the longer it stays, the more it shapes you. Not just what you do, but how you think, how you see yourself, how you respond, how you believe, and eventually, how you live. And that's how purpose gets affected. Not suddenly, but slowly, quietly, until one day you stop and wonder, how did I get here? And the answer isn't dramatic. It's not one big mistake. It's a series of small moments where you chose comfort over honesty, avoidance over confrontation, silence over truth. And those small moments built the life you're living now. But even now, after all of it, there's still something inside you that hasn't fully agreed, that hasn't fully gone quiet. And that matters more than you realize. There comes a moment, and most of the time it's not loud. It doesn't come with a dramatic breakdown or some big event that forces you to stop everything. More often than not, it slips in quietly. It might be something you hear, just a sentence that stays with you longer than it should. It might be a thought that keeps returning, no matter how many times you try to push it away. It might be a feeling, one that lingers just beneath the surface, refusing to disappear. At first, it's not clear. It doesn't come all at once, but slowly it starts to form. And when it does, it changes how you see everything. You didn't lose your purpose. That's what you've been telling yourself, maybe without even realizing it. You've wondered if you missed something, if you made a wrong turn somewhere, if somehow you ended up becoming someone you never planned to be. But the truth is, you didn't lose your purpose. You adjusted to what's been blocking it. You adapted to something that was never meant to stay in your life. And once you adapted, you stopped questioning it. Once you stopped questioning it, you stopped confronting it. And once you stopped confronting it, it began to shape you. Not all at once, not in a way that was obvious, but slowly, deeply, in ways that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. It started influencing how you think about yourself. It changed the way you talk to yourself when no one else is around. It affected what you believe you deserve, what you think is possible, what you assume is realistic for your life. And over time, without you even noticing it happening, it began to redefine your identity. And when identity shifts, even just a little, direction begins to shift too. That's how purpose gets affected. Not because it disappears, but because it gets redirected quietly, gradually, almost without you noticing. And here's the part that can be uncomfortable, but it's important to face it. God never agreed with what you started tolerating. Not when it first appeared, not when you explained it away, not when you began to build your life around it, not even now. Because what you've learned to live with, God still sees clearly. He sees it without the explanations you've created, without the reasons you've held on to, without the emotional attachments that made it easier to accept. He sees what it is. And not because He wants to shame you, not because He's trying to point a finger at you, but because He understands what it's doing to you. He sees what it's taking from you. He sees how it's affecting your clarity, your peace, your confidence, your ability to walk fully in who you were created to be. This isn't just about behavior. It goes deeper than that. This is about your identity, who you believe you are, and what you've accepted as part of yourself. This is about your faith, not just what you say you believe, but how you live, how you respond, what you choose to follow, and what you quietly ignore. This is about your healing, because what isn't faced doesn't go away. What stays hidden continues to work in the background. What you avoid continues to shape you. And that's why this matters more than you think, because you can't separate what you tolerate from what you become. You can't disconnect what you allow from where you're headed. And you can't expect clarity in your purpose while something unresolved is quietly influencing your direction. Maybe that's why things have felt off lately. Maybe that's why you've felt stuck, even when nothing obvious is wrong. Maybe that's why there's been a quiet sense of confusion or distance or restlessness that you can't fully explain. It's not random. It's not meaningless. It's not just life being difficult. It's the result of something that was never meant to stay, becoming something you've learned to live with. But here's what you need to hold on to. Just because you've lived with it for a long time doesn't mean it belongs in your life. Just because it feels familiar doesn't mean it defines you. Just because you've built your routines around it doesn't mean you were meant to stay there. And somewhere inside you, there's still a part that knows that, a part that hasn't agreed, a part that still resists, a part that still feels that quiet tension, that gentle discomfort, that sense that something isn't aligned. And that part of you, that's not weakness, that's not confusion, that's awareness. And awareness is where everything begins to change. Let's bring this closer to real life, not as an idea, but as something you can almost see happening. There was someone, and if you pay attention, you might recognize parts of yourself in their story. They didn't begin in a bad place. In fact, there was a time when things felt clear. They had direction. They had a sense of purpose. There was something inside them that felt steady, like they knew where they were going, even if they didn't have every detail figured out. What if the fact that this still bothers you means you haven't gone numb? What if the reason you can't fully settle into what you've been living with is because you were never meant to accept it? Because the truth is, If everything was fine, you wouldn't feel this. If it didn't matter, it wouldn't keep coming back. If nothing needed to change, there wouldn't be this tension. The fact that something inside you is stirring right now, the fact that it's uncomfortable, the fact that it's hard to ignore, that's not random. That's intentional. That's a sign. God hasn't been silent. He hasn't stepped away. He hasn't stopped speaking. You've just gotten used to filtering what you hear, holding on to what feels easy and pushing away what challenges you. But right now, something is breaking through that filter, and what you're feeling is clarity. And clarity doesn't always feel peaceful at first. Sometimes it feels exposing. Sometimes it feels unsettling. Sometimes it feels like everything inside you is shifting. But that doesn't mean it's harmful. It means it's real. And real is where healing begins. Because you can't heal what you refuse to face. You can't change what you keep justifying. You can't move forward while pretending something isn't affecting you. And that's why this moment matters. Because this is not just about recognizing something. This is about realizing something deeper. You're not stuck. You're not trapped. You're not too far gone. You've just been living with something that was never meant to stay. And now you're finally seeing it. And that changes everything. Now, this is where it becomes real in your everyday life. Because feeling something, even deeply, isn't enough by itself. You've had moments before, moments where something inside you said, this isn't right. Moments where you felt a push to change. Moments of clarity, even if they didn't last very long. But then life kept moving. Responsibilities came back. Distractions returned. And that clarity slowly faded again. So this time, it has to be different. Not louder, not more emotional, but more honest, more intentional, more grounded in what you actually do next. Because healing isn't built on a feeling, it's built on what you choose to do after the feeling passes. So let's make this simple and real. First, identify it honestly, not in general terms, not vaguely, not, I have some struggles. No, be specific. What exactly have you learned to live with? What is it? Is it a thought you keep returning to? A habit you've made room for? A reaction you justify? A belief about yourself that you've accepted as truth? Sit with that question longer than feels comfortable, because your first answer might not be your real answer. Your first answer is often the safer one, the one that doesn't go too deep. But if you stay with it, if you don't rush away from the discomfort, something more honest will surface. And when it does, don't look away. Name it clearly, without softening it, without trying to make it sound better. Because clarity starts with honesty, and honesty requires you to be specific. Second, stop justifying it. This is where it gets difficult, because justification feels like protection. It feels like you're being kind to yourself, understanding yourself, giving yourself grace. But there's a difference between grace and permission. Grace acknowledges the struggle. Permission allows it to stay. And sometimes, without realizing it, You've been protecting something that's been holding you back. So now you have to let go of the explanations. Not because they were completely wrong, but because they've kept you comfortable. And comfort is what allowed this to stay in your life. So instead of asking, is this understandable? Start asking, is this helping me become who I'm meant to be? And if the answer is no, then it doesn't need more explanation. It needs change. Third, bring it into the light, because what stays hidden keeps its power. What stays unspoken stays unchallenged. And you've already seen what happens when something goes unchallenged. It becomes normal. So now it has to be brought into the open. Not publicly, not for everyone to see, but honestly, in a way that breaks the silence. That might mean speaking it out in prayer, not in polished words, not in careful language, but honestly. Admitting what you've been avoiding, saying what you haven't wanted to say. Or it might mean writing it down, putting it on paper, seeing it clearly in front of you. Because once something is visible, it's harder to ignore. Fourth, replace the pattern. Because removing something is only half the process. If you leave that space empty, the same pattern will return. Maybe later, maybe in a different form, but it will come back. So something has to take its place, something intentional. If it's a thought, replace it with truth. If it's a habit, interrupt it with a new action. If it's a belief, choose something different to build on. And this doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, repeated choices, day after day, until those choices become natural, until they begin to shape how you think, how you respond, how you live. And finally, stay in the process, because this is where most people stop. They expect immediate change, immediate clarity, immediate results. But healing doesn't work like that. Healing takes time. It requires patience, consistency, showing up, even when nothing feels different yet, even when the old patterns still pull at you, even when progress feels slow. Because slow progress is still progress. And the goal isn't perfection, it's direction, a shift. A decision to stop living with something just because you've lived with it for a long time. And every time you choose differently, even in a small way, you're building something new, a new identity. And that identity will lead you back toward your purpose. So now we come back to where this started. You learned to live with it. That's the truth. Not because you wanted to stay there, but because it became familiar, because it felt manageable, because it was easier than facing it. And for a while, it worked. You adapted, you adjusted, you kept moving. But deep down, you never fully agreed with it. There was always something inside you that knew this wasn't right. That knew this wasn't who you were meant to be, that knew this wasn't where you were supposed to stay. And that voice, it never disappeared. It just got quieter, but it was never gone. And maybe that's why you're here right now, because something inside you is recognizing the truth again, but this time more clearly, more deeply, in a way that's harder to ignore. So hear this clearly. Your identity is not your compromise. It's not your struggle. It's not the pattern you've repeated. It's not the version of yourself you settled into. Those things may have been part of your experience, but they are not who you are. And your purpose, it hasn't disappeared. It hasn't been taken away. It hasn't been erased. It's still there, but it's waiting for alignment, waiting for you to stop building your life around something that was never meant to stay. Because purpose can't fully grow in a life built on quiet compromise. It needs honesty. It needs alignment. It needs you to face what you've been avoiding. And here's the truth you need to hold on to. God didn't walk away from you. Not when you started tolerating it. Not when you ignored it. Not even now. He's been there the whole time, patient, consistent, clear. You just get used to tuning certain things out. But now that changes. Not because everything is suddenly fixed, but because you see it. And once you see it, everything can begin to shift. Because the moment you stop living with it is the moment your healing begins. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. So don't ignore this. Not this time. Don't push it away. Don't distract yourself. Don't tell yourself you'll deal with it later. Because later is what allowed it to stay this long. This moment is different because now you know. And once you know, you have a choice. Stay where it's familiar or move toward what's true, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's uncertain. Take the step anyway, because your purpose isn't waiting for perfection. It's waiting for alignment. And alignment begins the moment you stop living with what you were never meant to carry. So if something in you felt this, don't ignore it. Let it change something. Let it move you. Because what you've been living with does not have to be what you live with forever.